All right, let's talk about that day, you know the one, when a huge chunk of the internet just, poof, vanished. I mean, one minute everything's working, the next, millions of us are just staring at broken apps and error messages. This was the massive Amazon Web Services outage. And today we're going to break down exactly what happened, why it happened, and maybe most importantly, why it's a huge warning sign for all of us.
So think back to October 20th. For so many of us, the day just started with, well, confusion, right? You reach for your phone to check a message, maybe pay a friend, or just kill some time with a game. And nothing. Crickets. The services you count on, the ones you use every single day, were just gone. It felt like this bizarre mystery, but it turns out it all pointed back to a single source.
And the scale of this was just staggering. Seriously, we're not talking about one or two small-time apps here. This was a digital who's who. You had Snapchat, Reddit, Zoom, major financial apps like Coinbase and Venmo, even Delta Airlines. Heck, even Amazon's own stuff, Alexa, Crime Video, got knocked out. It was a total digital blackout that hit pretty much every single corner of our online lives.
And you could feel that collective frustration, couldn't you? It wasn't just you, it was, get this, over 4 million of you all rushing to file reports with trackers like Down Detector. I mean, wow. This wasn't some minor hiccup, it was a digital tidal wave, and that number right there just shows how many of us were caught in it, all at the exact same time.
So that's the big question, right? How could so many different, totally unrelated companies all just fail at the exact same time? Well, it turns out they weren't so unrelated after all. You see, they all rent space from the same digital landlord, and on this day, that landlord's house had a very serious problem. So let's pull back the curtain and unmask the single source behind this whole mess.
Okay, to really get this, we got to talk about the cloud. I know, it sounds all floaty and mysterious, but it's actually super physical. When you hear something is in the cloud, it just means it's running on these giant, super powerful computers tucked away in massive data centers. You know, buildings owned by companies like Amazon. It's not on your phone or your laptop, it's really the engine that makes the modern internet go. And the culprit in our story? Well, it's the biggest engine of them all, Amazon Web Services, or AWS for short. This is the largest cloud provider on the entire planet. They're basically renting out their computing power and storage to thousands upon thousands of companies, from the tiniest little startup to absolute global giants.
So, just how dominant are we talking? Well, AWS controls a staggering 30% of the entire global cloud market. And here's the crucial thing to understand. When AWS has a problem, it's not just their problem. Oh no. A failure on their end creates this massive ripple effect. It's like a giant rock thrown into a pond, and it can take down a huge chunk of the internet with it.
And get this, here's the real kicker. This global digital catastrophe, it didn't start everywhere at once. It all started in one single physical location, a massive AWS data center region out in Virginia, known as US-EAST-1. This is one of their oldest and biggest facilities, and on this particular day, it became the absolute epicenter of the internet's earthquake.
So how on earth did one location cause a full-blown internet-wide meltdown? Okay, let's trace the steps. We're going to see how a single, tiny technical error created this cascading failure that just snowballed out of control, knocking out service after service in a devastating chain reaction. All right, so the very first domino to fall involves something called DNS, the domain name system. The absolute best way to think about this is like the internet's phone book. When you type in a website, DNS is the thing that looks it up and connects you to the right numerical IP address. Without it, your app literally can't find the server it needs to talk to. It's like having a name but no phone number to call. And that is exactly what happened here. A DNS error hit a supercritical AWS database service called DynamoDB. Just think of it as a giant digital filing cabinet. And all of a sudden, thousands of apps couldn't find that cabinet to get the data they needed. So they just failed. But it didn't stop there. That failure then crippled Amazon's main computing service, EC2. We're talking the brains of the whole operation. And that, in turn, triggered network issues that just spread like a virus. It was one small crack, and the whole dam started to break.
So, just how bad was the damage inside Amazon itself? According to their own report, this cascade hit 142 of their own distinct services. Let that sink in. This wasn't just one system having a bad day. This was a systemic meltdown inside the biggest cloud provider on Earth.
Okay, so
Let's zoom out from all the technical stuff for a second. What does an event like this really tell us? Because it reveals something pretty profound and, frankly, maybe a little unsettling about the fragile digital world we've all built and just how much we depend on it.
Of course, experts were quick to weigh in on this. Listen to what cybersecurity advisor Jake Moore said. He put it perfectly. This whole thing just highlights our dependency on what are, in his words, relatively fragile infrastructures. We treat the internet like a utility, like turning on a light switch. It should just work. But this outage really shows the complex and sometimes very brittle foundation that's holding it all up.
But it's not just about AWS. Others, like Professor Ken Berman, pointed out that the responsibility doesn't just lie with Amazon. You see, the developers building apps on AWS actually have tools to protect against these kinds of outages, but, well, not everyone uses them. He argues that maybe the companies that cut corners and didn't build in that resilience, they're the ones who should really be under the microscope.
So, at the end of the day, it really all comes down to this big trade-off. On one hand, having these giant, centralized cloud providers like AWS is incredibly efficient, it's powerful, it lets even a tiny startup get access to world-class technology. But the downside? A massive, single point of failure. When it works, it's absolutely brilliant. But, as we all saw, when it breaks for everybody.
An event like this just forces a really critical conversation about what happens next. This has to be a wake-up call, right? We have to start thinking seriously about how we can build a more resilient, more robust digital future.
And it's really important to remember this one thing. This whole massive disruption, it wasn't a malicious cyber attack. There were no bad guys, no shadowy hackers. According to all the reports, it was simply a technical error. And that's a powerful reminder, isn't it? That all these complex systems powering our modern lives, they're ultimately built and maintained and, sometimes broken by other humans.
Which really leaves us with this final, critical question to chew on. We've made a deal, haven't we? We've traded some measure of resilience for incredible convenience and power. But as we've just seen, the cost of failure is absolutely enormous. So the question for you is that trade-off really worth it? And what are we all going to do to prepare for the next time the internet breaks? Because there will be a next time.